I'm Jennifer Tuttle. I direct the Maine Women Writers Collection here at UNE. And on behalf of the Women Writers Collection and the university, I welcome you to today's Donna M. Loring Lecture. We gather here today together on Wabanaki land. This land holds the stories of those who have inhabited this place. And part of healing the wounds between us is to listen. We're grateful to Outdusis Cunningham, Geo Neptune, Jennifer Neptune, and Sarah Sockbeson for sharing your artwork and your stories with us today. We're grateful to Professor Darren Ranco for moderating, and to Donna Loring for opening today's event. We're also grateful to all of you for taking the time to be here with us. Finally, I would like to thank both Donna Loring and Kathleen Miller for their work planning this event. And I'd like to thank IT and communications for all of their help, as well as Sodexo, housekeeping, and facilities for making this come together. I'll just take this moment also quickly to remind folks to silence your cell phones and devices, and to just reassure any students or faculty, if you have 1 o'clock classes, do not be embarrassed about leaving in time to be there on time. We're hoping to be able to go at least till about 1:15 today, so we might be going a little past that hour mark. So I'd like now to introduce Donna Loring and to say a couple of quick words about the Donna M. Loring Lecture. As many of you know, Donna Loring is a Penobscot Nation tribal elder, and she held the position of the nation's representative to the Maine State Legislature for 12 years. And among her many accomplishments in that capacity, and one that's particularly relevant to those of us who work in education, was her sponsorship of the act to require the teaching of Maine Native American history in Maine schools, which addresses an urgent need in our education system and in the culture at large. She is also the author of In the Shadow of the Eagle, a tribal representative in Maine, and is the host of Wabanaki Windows on WERU. Ms. Loring is president of Seven Eagles Media Productions, a nonprofit whose mission is to eliminate cultural bias and institutional discrimination against Wabanaki people through supporting the accurate representation through media of Wabanaki culture and history. In 2011, she was recognized by UNE with a Deborah Morton Award, given to outstanding women who have achieved high distinction in their careers and public service, and who are exceptional leaders in civic, cultural, and social causes. In 2009, Donna Loring deposited her personal, professional, and literary papers to UNE's Maine Women Writers Collection. In acknowledgement of that gift, the Donna M. Loring Lecture at UNE highlights issues of concern to Native people in Maine and beyond. It opens a clearing where the community may participate in some of the conversations that are necessary to move toward healing the deep wounds created by colonization. Patrick Wolfe has famously said that colonization is a structure, a process, not an event. The Donna M. Loring Lecture illuminates and helps to deconstruct that dynamic. It is an extension of Donna Loring's ongoing work and an important part of UNE's educational mission. It is now my privilege and my honor to cede the podium to Donna Loring and to wish her a very happy birthday.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming. Thank you for President James Herbert and his wife Lynn for attending. Appreciate it. And someone asked me if I planned this for my birthday. The answer is yes. I do want to I'm going to make this very quick because we got lots of stuff to talk about today. The idea for this basket project came from a play that I had written. It's called The Luscabi and the Venetian Basket. And I wanted to write the ending to this play and couldn't figure out how I could end the play. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, that's where I always get my ideas. I woke up and I knew exactly what it was going to be. The ending, I could just see this basket that Chief Brenda Commander had on her desk. And I remember going to her office and saying, "What is that?" And she picked it up, handed it to me, and she said, "This medicine man, who we thought was kind of a wacko, made this and gave it to me." And she just laughed, and I laughed, and she said, "It's made out of Venetian blinds." And the medicine man said, this is for the time when there are no more ash trees. And this was years ago. So the idea for this project that you're going to hear about came from that time, from what would we use for alternative materials, how would we keep that process and that paradigm going within our communities without at the ash tree, and I'm going to be, and the artist will tell you how sacred these ash trees are to us. So I'm just going to introduce, and I don't have their bios with me, and really, I mean, each of these artists are very special people. We have Pam Cunningham. Are you guys going to come up here? You don't have to. You don't have to, I guess, because you can just, maybe you could just stand up, because I think Darren's going to talk. Yeah. So Pam Cunningham, who's the daughter of Sipsis, and okay, so those are her baskets. One is a traditional, one is a non-traditional, and she'll tell you about those later. But Pam has done some really great work too, and I invited her on my radio show one day, and she brought one of her puppets, and I said, "Too bad it's a radio show, you know." But they were great. So, and Pam has done some really, really fine work with the baskets, and she'll tell you about that. Then there's Geo Neptune. Geo, I'm very honored to have Geo here. I think he's on the cover of what's that magazine? Maine magazine. 50 Mainers, yep. So they got that right, huh, Geo? Have been very prominent within the Native theatrical community and performers and artists and whatever. And Geo's done a fantastic job representing the Wabanaki people. And then there's Jennifer Neptune. She's a great artist, not just in the in basket weaving, but she's done some tremendous beadwork in replicating the chief's collar and cuffs. So she's a great artist in her own right. And the baskets that she makes are very old tradition Penobscot baskets. And she'll tell you about those too. And then there's Sarah Sockbeson, who Sarah is, well, she's really good at what she does. She combines art with some paintings and whatever on the tops of her, I don't think we have any here, but on the tops of her baskets, which really I liked. And we've done videos on each of these artists, and I don't know if we'll see them today, but because I don't think we have the time, but we'll make sure that you get access to those videos. And in those videos, you'll see Sarah's work. And she combines artwork and basket weaving. So that's pretty unique. So with that, I will introduce Dr. Darren Ranco. Where are you, Darren? There. Who will talk to you a little bit about his work with the emerald ash borer beetle. and he is the director of, tell me about that. He's on my radio show all the time. I should remember what he does. He's
Chair of Native American Programs.
okay, chair of Native American Programs, and also anthropology, the chair, acting chair of anthropology. Okay, he knows what he's talking about. He's a doctor, all right? Hey, Darren.
Thank you, Donna, and welcome everyone today. I feel welcome here. This is not my campus. Inviting someone with a PhD to come and just talk for a couple minutes is always a daunting task because we're all like, we know everything, and we're going to tell you everything. I'll try to keep this brief. I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview. We are at what I would consider a really important turning point and potential crisis when it comes to our basket making traditions here in the state of Maine. So it's I wanted to just share sort of the up-to-date information because things have actually moved pretty quickly this past summer, and I wanted to make sure everyone was kind of caught up and understood what that threat is and what it looks like and where we're at. Does that make sense? Hopefully that I ask questions when I'm giving a lecture, assuming no one will actually answer them. But someone told me that it actually revealed my working class background, that I had always to check in with people to make sure they're okay. Okay. So the emerald ash borer, that's what it looks like. And as the slide points out, it was, first discovered. It's an invasive. It's from China. It came to the U.S. Probably in the 90s on shipping pallets from China. The port of Detroit was its primary sort of location of where it came to, and it was discovered first in 2002 in the Detroit area, and it has spread. I can't even read my slide. 35 states, 4 provinces since 2002, killed over 150 million trees. It kills all species of ash trees, and I'll talk about how it does that in the next slide. It was first discovered in New Hampshire in 2013, which really put us on alert, I think. And actually, it took 5 years for it to be discovered. Probably was present here, but it took another 5 years for it to be discovered here, which I consider a blessing because we've done a lot of thought and preparedness work to try to really say, like, what will we do once it actually comes to Maine? So that's the only upside of this. It was discovered in Madawaska on May of this past year, and then just a couple of weeks ago, discovered down here in York County. I don't think, are we in York County? No, we're not. Yeah. I don't know, I just put the address on my little GPS and came here. So that just a couple of weeks ago. The emerald ash borer, it actually kills trees in its reproduction cycle. So you can see the female lay eggs underneath the bark of ash trees, and that's the bark of ash trees is really special. Maybe the Basketmakers will talk about it, but it's a very insulating and nice kind of porous bark and fairly thick, and the eggs are laid underneath that bark, and then the eggs grow into larvae that eat the phloem, the nutrients that are underneath the bark, and that's how they grow into the adult ash borer, and that's how it kills the tree. It basically girdles the tree from the inside. Right, so that prevents any nutrients flowing back and forth up and down the tree. So the adult bug, which you can see emerging from that little D-shaped hole, does very little damage to the tree. They just nibble a little bit on the leaves, and they just fly around right up at the top, and they're basically harmless, but it's their reproductive cycle that kills the tree. So I talked about it being discovered in Detroit in 2002, and at the time, and actually the Maine Indian Basketmakers Alliance and some other folks actually had the very first meeting about the emerald ash borer in Bar Harbor in 2004, not long after it was discovered. And we've really picked up on that work. Jennifer and I and others have been really active in trying to prepare for this and saying, well, when will it get here? What will be the impacts? Well, how can we prepare for it? What are we going to do? Alternative materials, Donna mentioned, is one aspect of a response, but that's not the only one. And the natural spread is about 750, under a kilometer a year, if you just sort of, without the help of people. But we've really helped it. here like most invasives, people actually are a really important vector, and it's been spread around the country much quicker than we first thought, mostly because of the transportation of firewood. Our team of scholars and Basketmakers, we prepared testimony when the state of Maine was considering a law to prevent outside firewood, which was passed and started to be implemented in January of 2014, and we testified earlier than that. So that's a really important thing, is to say, don't bring firewood that might be infested. There are a bunch of different kinds of ways in which it's spread. When we first started working on this in 2009, and the blue areas are basically where it had been detected. So anything that's outlined in blue is where it had been detected in 2009, and we started work on that. So it had just gotten into Western New York, and so we felt like we had time to respond, and in fact we did. This is the map of infestation. You can see all the little red things. They get, easier to track. So this is from 2016, so a couple of years after it had been in New Hampshire. And then this is now the most recent map, and you can see they actually, I couldn't find I don't think they have the map of the York County infestation yet, but you can see at the very top of Maine there, the Madawaska detect as well. So this gives you a little bit of a timeline. First discovered in Madawaska in May. There have been an initial emergency order was set by the state in August to respond to that. And I'll explain what an emergency order does, but it's basically the first step in regulating and trying to control the spread of the emerald ash borer in the state. And then it was discovered just a couple weeks ago in York County, and then they expanded the emergency order to also address some of the towns here in York County. So as you can see, you can see more where the spread of these the emerald ash borer came in terms of, I think we were more anticipating a York County infestation than we were a Madawaska northern Maine infestation, simply because it had been in New Hampshire, so close to here for a number of years. Just in the spring, it was discovered in Edmundston, so just across the border from Madawaska in Canada, in northern Maine, and that was a really new detect, and I think it caught us off guard, and I think it actually threatens more. In northern Maine, there are more brown ash resources than there are here in southern Maine in general, and I feel like that sense of being caught off guard, and also the fact that there are more resources that would be there for Basketmakers, is also one of the things that we're kind of worried about. So an emergency order is just a tool, and I mentioned that, used at the discretion of the director of the Maine Forest Service, and basically limits the flow of ash material outside of that control area that are designated. And these areas include the towns in and around Madawaska, Grand Isle, Frenchville, and here in York County, Acton, Berwick, Lebanon, and there's actually just a meeting, I believe today, somewhere down here, I think over in Lebanon, to discuss what the implications of this emergency order are for the movement of ash, from inside there. So it will impact, obviously, anyone who cuts trees that include ash trees, that will try to take them out of these controlled areas. Eventually this fall, there will be a formal quarantine zone set up, and I imagine there'll be parts of York County and Aroostook County. It'll be bigger than this emergency order once we figure out the extent of the infestation. So that's going to be a really important, and that's issued jointly by the state of Maine and the federal government. The USDA, Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, is the lead regulator on that. And so what does an emergency order do? And you can see that it basically just limits anything kind of coming out of those areas that have been designated, including anything that, and this is the concern, I think, especially in Aroostook County, once the quarantine is set, is folks who gather our brown ash trees for basket making are going to be stuck not being able to transport them from where they cut them to where they process them. So that's going to be the really potential disruption, and we're trying to figure out what the extent of that disruption is. In Michigan, we've been working with Michigan Basketmakers for all this time, since 2009. Jennifer and others have great connections out there. And what they have to do oftentimes if they're behind a quarantine line is they actually have to process the tree where they cut it, which would be a huge hassle and may really actually impact the ways in which we gather resources in terms of basket making. So we have plans to address that. We have many, many plans, and I won't go into that because apparently, I'm almost at time. But the idea is to really be responsive and be able to kind of deal with this in a productive way. And luckily in Maine, we've learned from basket makers in Michigan and New York who've had to deal with this already, and we do have, I think, pretty good plans to deal with it. And then that's a representation of why this tree is so important. So with that, maybe we can have. Oh, sure. I didn't feel like I was necessarily the one. But so there is a story that is shared amongst the Wabanaki communities here in Maine about Gluskabe, who's our culture hero, shooting an arrow into the ash tree and the people coming out singing and dancing. So it's part of it's really tied to our understanding of our origins and our connection to this tree. So when we think about it, we as a social scientist, I talk about the brown ash as a cultural keystone species, right? So it has all these characters. It's obviously economic, right? People make a living with these baskets, but it's cultural, right? It's the oldest documented arts tradition in New England. It's through families, mine and everyone you'll see today. It's generations-long connection to cultural practice, and it's also spiritual, right? So it also has this sort of origin, spiritual, deeper cultural connection for us. So the idea of replacing it, which is in some ways possible, with another material to weave with, doesn't come without other kinds of costs in terms of our connection to resources and our connection to this particular tree. So I think that's really the context for the story. Anything else? Maybe we can have the talented people come up and actually come and talk about their work. So, what I wanted to do though was Donna already gave an overview of who the artists are, and I would like everyone to talk about basically what their artwork is and how they go about it, but also sort of the why behind it, because I think each of these artists has a really amazing story to share. So,
by making baskets, we were able to still continue to travel on the landscape to the places that we had always gone in the summer to the coast, where wealthy people from the cities were starting to come to escape the heat and all the smog of the cities in the mid-1800s, and tourism started in Maine, and those were places we were going anyway to fish and gather sweetgrass and do all those wonderful things. So it was the ash tree, the basket tree, that allowed us to maintain our culture and to continue being Penobscot and Passamaquoddy and Wabanaki people the way that we want it to be, and to continue that. So baskets bought food, sent kids to school, sent people through college, pays the oil bills, does all this magical stuff that helps us to survive. So it's really important. I became a basket maker in the early 1990s when the Maine Indian Basket Makers Alliance was forming. And I was a beadworker then, but always wanted to be a basket maker, and hanging out with basket makers, they quickly turn you into one, and that was how I became a basket maker. And just looking at a lot of old baskets. My degree is also in anthropology, and I chose that so I could get into museums, actually, and see old beadwork and old baskets and really study them and be up close to them. And so that's really impacted what I do and what I make, and I've learned so much from ancestors that I've never even met just by studying the work there in the museums. So Donna's project was really compelling and interesting because it's something I think that we've all been thinking about. I started hearing about the emerald ash borer pretty early after it was discovered in Michigan. So I was out doing shows, Santa Fe Indian Market and Hurd Indian Market, and Kelly Church, who is a friend of mine, started to tell us, like, hey, this is what's happening in Michigan, and you guys better start preparing for it now because it's going to wipe out all your trees and, you know, doom and gloom. And I listened. I was scared, and she said, you should be. It took quite a while to impact out there, and she is, you know, now 20 years or so, having to leave her area and go to the upper parts of Michigan to find trees. So it's not going to be an instant thing, and hopefully our forests will be a little different and we'll slow it down. But it's definitely on our minds and very important to us. The basket that I made to represent our traditional baskets and the ash tree is kind of an old style. I wanted to do this diamond weave. You need to have like really perfect ash to do that well, almost like paper. It has to be super fine. And then this old style, little lacy style around the top that was done quite a while ago on some of the antique baskets, just to show, you know, the beauty of ash and what you can do with it. The alternative material basket, I used cedar bark, the inner bark of cedar. On the West Coast, they do a lot of baskets with cedar, and in my travels with Maine Indian Basketmakers Alliance and the shows that I do, I've made a lot of friends that make cedar bark baskets and always love them. And in museums, actually, it's kind of interesting. Not many people realize that Wabanaki people also made cedar bark baskets. And you know, National Museum of the American Indian has some. They were made for like big, like hunting bags that you could stuff your small game and birds into. And so just drawing on that tradition, something that's been gone, to have something traditional. And this was made on an old block from probably the late 1800s to weave around to get the shape. So it's an old style of basket. And then I used waxed linen, and I used, it's hard to see, but it's paper, actually, paper yarn that comes from Japan that I bought in New York City to do this part here. And so just drawing on a lot of things. We do have a lot of traditional materials that aren't used much anymore, such as cedar and basswood. The inner fibers of those trees are used to make cordage, and were used in our traditions to make different things, and hunting bags, really beautiful bags, and different items. And so, you know, a lot of us have been working with that and those different materials. In case we do reach a time where we don't have ash, we will have something that we can continue to weave with and continue our traditions. Part of my work with Darren and the Maine Indian Basketmakers Alliance, we also have worked on documenting with video, like all the steps. So if there's a stretch of time where there is no ash, our future generations will be able to look back at those videos and learn from the men that go out and get the trees where the seeds should be replanted, where they grow, where they like to grow, how to harvest it, how to prepare it to be able to make baskets. And so we will leave that behind just in case there ever is a stretch where it has to take a break for a while. But we're confident it will never be forgotten and it will come back at some point.
I'm Pamela, Outdusis, Cunningham, Penobscot Master Basketmaker, tribal council leader for our tribe. And I started making baskets in the early 90s when I worked at the Penobscot Nation Health Center. We had to go and visit the elders and check on the shut-ins. And even though I grew up on Indian Island, a lot of people just thought we were being nosy and didn't want us coming in. So they didn't. So one of the ways that we found how to get in and find out how they were doing was to sit at the kitchen table and watch them make baskets. And I learned a lot. And after a while, they would, tell us stuff, and then we could go back and tell the doctors. And but I really learned a whole lot. I was thinking about when I was setting up the bookmarks over there. Like I got this bracelet when I took my first apprentice on, and so I became a master. Which it wasn't. I didn't like the name master because it was like, oh, who do I think I am? But it was because of the process of taking on an apprentice and passing on basket making to somebody in my own tribe who actually happened to be an elder. So one of the elders had taught me, and I thought about it last night, she always said, always make sure that you have little stuff like the bookmarks for the people that appreciate the baskets, but they don't have the big money to pay for the baskets, because you could always influence a new collector. And so when I was doing the baskets, the bookmarks, like, why would I waste my time on that when I can make a whole bunch of money on these cool things? But at a show, you have little kids that maybe only have $5, and they love the baskets and the smell of the sweetgrass. And for $5, they can buy a bookmark. And the bookmarks are really symbolic because that's how I teach the youth is. And it's kind of like the scraps of the basket. You've got some leftovers, and you let the youth, you teach them how to lay out. And you can use our language by counting and colors and how you lay it out and why. And then once they can figure that out, then they can make the bottom of a basket. And this basket actually happens to be freehand. I don't make it on a mold because it came to me in a dream years ago, 15 maybe years ago. And the dream was so clear, I was like, holy cow, I got to make that basket. So I did, and then I was like, what am I going to do with it? And what is the meaning of it? So for a whole summer, I just toted my kids around with me and went down to the Abbey Museum, sold my baskets, but I always had an honor basket's what I came to have called it. But I always had it in my little collection of other stuff I was selling. So one day, the Adrian Redhair says, I have to ask you about that basket. I see it, and you never say anything about it. And I was like, I don't even know what, like, my friend, he had died, and we'd done hospice with him on Indian Island, and but in my dream, he was like, hey, thanks for making me that basket. It's really cool. And he had all this, like, cool stuff on it. So I didn't know what to do with it. And I didn't want to give it to his brother because he was in jail for drugs, and I felt like it was such an awesome basket. And so I was like, I don't know what to do with it. And I didn't really know his mom because she wasn't, Penobscot. And so I just said, I don't know what to do with it. And so she said, well, I think the museum needs to have that in their collection. And I said, that would be a great place. So it's sitting down at the Abbey Museum in Bar Harbor. And it just, the meaning in it, for it to be so clear, I feel like it was a gift and that I was the conduit for it. It's a prayer basket. There's so much honor in it. The bottom, the square coming up to the circle of unity, and all the little contents in it. It's just fun, and the colors, and the smudging, the prayer. So that's actually my number one. I get orders for this all the time. It's 80%. If you look in my QuickBooks, it's 80% of my sales is the honor basket. And then I got the prayer basket, which is the second most requested basket. But it was freehand. Every other basket I make is on a mold. So the freehand was like, well, I could, make that anywhere. Back in it was about 10 years ago, and I was on the board of directors for the Maine Indian Basketmakers Alliance, and I think it was 2009, I got a grant to find out about other materials that we could use, and I also wanted to find out Penobscot language, so I went to the dictionary, and I looked with help from Carol Daner and Gabe Paul to find all the basket making terms, and the woods and the, like woolly mate, it smells good, woolly muskegul, sweetgrass, wickabamizi, and it was like, geez, what if this beetle comes? What other stuff can we use? And so I tried all these other woods and fibers, and the ash is just like, it's just wonderful. It's like you get a good piece of I'm looking over here, I'm like, oh, geez, that was a good one. And you just, it really, I can feel the excitement when I get some good ash. And like you can split that sometimes 5, 6 times. It's like, oh yeah. And and even like when I'm teaching workshops, I'll be like, well, all right, here, this one's for me. I'll use this one. And sometimes I don't even want to use it on baskets because it's just so nice. And but when I teach the kids, I use more of the heartwood, which is a little bit darker, and just because it takes a lot to make a basket, and it's really messy. But there's some of the kids that just get it. I mean, they get braiding sweetgrass like holy, and I know that they're from my tribe. It's like, oh, I know your grandmother. Geez, she used to braid for the Basketmakers, and they can sit there and talk up a storm and braid, and it's like wow, you're a natural. And just some people, the whole community of the basket making, getting the tree, pounding it, if you're gonna dye it, braiding the grass, it's a whole community effort, or it used to be. And like when I pound ash, my hands they swell up, so I can't weave baskets. So I choose not to pound ash. And I'm getting older too, but who wants to go out in the woods and get a stick of ash when you get all kinds of 20-year-olds around that, So, so I started teaching basket making. Well, I've been doing it for forever, thanks to Maine Indian Basketmakers Alliance, going around to all the tribes in Maine and, keeping it going. So I got the grant in 2009 from the New England Foundation of the Arts. And so what I ended up doing was I made this little thing so that when I teach the kids, it would give them a placemat to work so the basket wouldn't get grimy if the table was dirty. But it also had like the technique, and then I added the colors in Penobscot and the numbers in Penobscot. And then on the back, if they really wanted to go further, they could learn how to, speak basket making in Penobscot, which I thought was cool. And so I had been working on this, and at the Indian Island School, the after-school program, I was kind of like looking into the future, thinking, wouldn't it be great to have an immersion program where you come to make baskets and you have to talk basket making? And then, my life changed and everything went on hold, and just kind of quit. But in 2014, I've been looking for different material, and I just happened to be at the Bangor Public Library in February, and we were doing I can't even remember what it was called, but Winter Blues Festival of Artists. I was the only basket maker there doing a demonstration, and there were like 100 people making rugs out of wool, and I was like, didn't even know about this, because I was just so immersed in my own people and my own culture that I hadn't really stood up to see what else was out there. So I started looking, and I was like, holy, this is wool. This is wet felted, that's hooked, that's penny rugs, that's embroidery, that's what is all this? And so I took signed up for a class from a lady in my hometown, Hamden, who had been making hooked rugs since, before I was even born. I think she started in like the early 60s. And so And on one part of the rug, she left a blank spot and said, do your own design. So I did a double curve design, and I was like, I could teach this. This is fun. And, you know, if we can't make baskets, we can still add sweetgrass. You know, we can add our designs. And so I started learning, and then when I was at her shop, and we were waiting for everybody to show up for the class, she had all these old magazines, and it was like, you know, 5 for 25 cents. And so I like to do research, and so I grabbed a bunch. And the first one I opened up said Wabanaki rugs. And I said, what? This is a sign from the universe. I am supposed to be teaching these Wabanaki rugs to the Wabanaki. And so I was like looking around to see if anybody else, you know, like heard the universe going, Pamela! and so I read the article, and I fell in love with Helen R. Albee. Way back in the late 1800s, she made this cottage industry in New Hampshire with the farm women to teach these hooked rugs. And she did this she even wrote books about the business. And I mean, I even got the Bangor Public Library book over there that I have a friend who is a curator, or he works at the library, and he was like, Pam, you got to give that book back. And I was like, who else is going to read it? It hasn't even been checked out since 1906. And so I just keep renewing it. And but but I love the smell of it. I love the whole way that she talks. And so I got on, people started, even the dentist from our tribe, he was like, hey, I found these books on eBay, and they're like $9, Helen R. Albee. And I was like, what? And he was like, I bought them for you because they were only $9. So I got them, I marked them all up, I highlighted them, and was like, wow, this could really be something. And so I had slowly, that 2014, I started teaching people. I didn't even know how to do it, but I was like, hey, we could do this. You know, so all the stuff over there that's not the basket stuff is just stuff that I've been learning. I just got myself immersed in it. But in 2015, my husband passed away, and that's when my life changed, and I just quit everything. I couldn't even touch baskets. It just made me so sad. And the wool was just like, well, you know, whatever. I got to take care of my kids. I don't even know what's going on, and blah, 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 blah. So people would tell me, you've got to get back to basket making. But every time I touched it, I would cry, and I was like, no, I can't do it. So I had people say, well, you know, you're crying because you just need to take a break, and you need to heal with your grief. So I was like, all right, so I just kept trying, and then my kids were like, Mom, because I used to work at the kitchen table, and like every day there'd be ash everywhere, right? Sweetgrass and piles of color everywhere. And but I wasn't working at the table, and they were like, Mom, you gotta get healthy, you gotta heal. And I was like, well, yeah, whatever. So somebody had given me some lavender for healing, for grief, and I fell in love with it. And I started doing research on it, and I found out that moths hate lavender. And so it was like a natural kind of like, all right, I'm going to turn my farm into a lavender farm because it's good for healing and grief. And my Indian name is Outdusis. I'm going to make a labyrinth, and I'm going to do all this outside farm stuff. So I've been farming for a couple of years, and then I couldn't do the youth afternoon school thing because the girls they were like, oh my God, Pammy, your husband died. And they knew my kids. And then I used to take my mom with me, who had Alzheimer's. I would take her to work with me twice a week. And then when she passed 6 months later, every time I saw the kids, they'd cry, and it would crush me, and I just couldn't do it. I couldn't even go to I couldn't even go to the mall. Everywhere I went was just too much. I just felt like my life was just too much for people to handle. So, but farming, you're by yourself, you know, so that's what I did. And then we had our Indian Day, and I did it last year too. They said, can you teach basket making for community days, I guess they call it now. And I said, I guess I can. So last year I did it, and there was like, I don't know, 50 people there. so we all getting around, and and then I did it again this year. Last year I did it on my birthday. This year it was the day before my birthday. So I felt like the ancestors were saying, all right, here's your gift. It's your birthday. You go, you give to your people, and you heal. And it was like, all right. And it was like, I remember this. I know this. My hands I don't even have to watch making a basket. It just is there. And so my sons, I had made a big rug, a family rug I was working on before my husband passed. And the kids said, Mom, you need to finish that. And so I went up to our friend's camp for a week by myself, and I finished that rug, and I cried, and I processed. And then when I came home, I got new ideas, and I started using color, and I'm working on that pumpkin one over there. And so basket making's really messy, and if the kids are, if there's fighting going on at home and the kids are making a mess, everybody's going to be upset. But what I found with sewing, embroidery even, you can make designs with, thread and needle and some recycled material. This material here, it's a wool blanket, but it's a U-Haul moving blanket. And so, and that's just the inside is an old pillowcase that I had. So I wanted to teach the people, what can we do to keep, to stay connected, use our language. And I think wool is where I'm going, for sure. Thank you.
So I'm Sarah Sockbeson, and I'm Penobscot. I started learning how to make baskets right after I graduated high school, so I was around 18. And my great-grandmother had made baskets, so it was in my family, and it was something that I always wanted to learn. But when I sat with my grandmother, I lived with her for a while on Indian Island, and when I sat down with her, I actually realized that she couldn't remember a lot of the knowledge that, even though she claims she helped her mother make baskets, and that's what her mother did. Her mother did it for a living. She made baskets, and she did the kind of tourism route and sold her baskets for a living. So it was something that was in my family, yet her daughter, my grandmother, I don't think she had as much interest in it, and I don't think she saw it as culturally significant. And I kind of also feel that during her kind of time period, those cultural traditions were almost discouraged. And even with the language, my great-grandmother would not teach my grandmother the language because she wanted her to fit in, and she wanted her to not be different, I guess. And so when it came to the basketry, I knew it was in my family, and it was definitely something that was, I guess, something I was drawn to. And for me, coming from my perspective, I think everybody as a basket maker gets into it a little bit differently. And for me, I've always been an artist, and growing up, I think art was just something that I always had an affinity to. And it was the class I loved most in school. It was I was always just thinking, I guess, creatively, how to make things. Always wanted to just be making things. That's pretty much the main thing that I felt a strong desire to do. And so when I was living with my grandmother right out of high school, I really didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I didn't know what direction I kind of wanted to take, but I kind of knew that I wanted to be an artist. I think that's something that has always followed me no matter what, and it was something that I guess really feels fulfilling to make things. So when I was living there, I ended up going to the Maine Indian Basketmakers Alliance when they had a little shop across town, and I would always just peek in there and look at all the baskets. And I would also like go to the museum, and I guess the baskets were what I was mostly drawn to, something that I felt a connection with. And when I tried to kind of pick up that knowledge with my grandmother, I quickly realized when I actually sourced some ash on my own from another tribal member, and when I brought the ash home and I was like, okay, now you're going to teach me, I realized that she didn't retain enough of the knowledge in order to teach me. And so I was lucky enough to have met Jennifer, to know Jennifer. And so Jennifer was my teacher. And so she taught me right out of high school. And that's when I kind of dove headfirst into the world of basketry. And I haven't stopped ever since. It's been something that I feel a very strong connection with. And even though it's kind of a repetitive thing sometimes, it could feel that way. I think every basket is different, and there's always more creative ways to, I guess, push the boundaries in terms of what you label a basket. So for me, my perspective when I really look at my work and what I do, I think I just try to look at it differently and not be so strict or not too, I don't want to adhere too strictly to tradition or too strictly to what is a basket, because I think I want to think about what I want to make as an artist. And first and foremost, I'm a creative person, so I want to create things that I guess, one, I enjoy making, and two, that I feel really pushes my my potential, and it pushes me to improve. So when I'm initially kind of starting out with creating, when I first started making baskets, I wanted to have like a strong foundation, working with the wood and the material and learning all the old techniques and absorbing as much information as I could in order to perpetuate like the knowledge and make sure that it was something that could actually continue in my family. And since there was kind of a gap where my grandmother didn't learn, I wanted to make sure that I picked it up and I knew the base foundation in order to be able to pass it on eventually. So when I also, because I'm an artist and I'm thinking at looking at things, I'm trying to see the work from a whole different perspective. And I think a lot of times within like the basketry community, a lot of the other artists, I think they get stuck thinking that they have to make things traditionally because that's the way it's been done for, you know, years and years and years. So I've sometimes worked with like material here and there that was non-traditional, and sometimes I would almost be like kind of criticized, like, oh, you're cheating, like, you know, you can't use that. And that was there was a point where I really started to just look at things completely different, and I thought to myself, a lot of the newer additions to our pieces, especially like in the Victorian era, those were at one time evolutions of our craft. So for example, there were other materials besides the ash and sweetgrass incorporated, especially like the use of Hong Kong. It's a type of cordage that was used in the 20s, I would say, 20s, yeah. And so when that type of material was introduced, that was, you know, completely different, something non-traditional. And it actually made weaving a lot easier for a lot of the basket makers because they wouldn't have to braid the sweetgrass. And that's a very time-consuming process. So I think over time, this art and this tradition has been evolving, and so in my mind I'm thinking that it shouldn't ever stop evolving. And especially today for me, I am a younger artist, and I'm also I guess a modern person. So for me, I have a modern perspective no matter what. That's what I have. That's what I've grown up with, you know. And so I really try to just be true to my voice as an artist, to be true to who I am as a Native person, and to just create what I guess feels right to me, and not be strictly confined to our traditional materials. It's important to me that I utilize our traditional materials, and I have like a strong foundation in that. But I think it's also important that we kind of think beyond that, and especially if we come to a place where the material is scarce, I think we have to keep this tradition alive no matter what. Even if we don't have the materials, I think we still have something that's valuable and something that's really worth sharing and worth perpetuating. So that's, I guess, my kind of perspective on how I come to basketry. And I think also, especially everyone kind of touched on in the 90s when the Basketmakers, everybody noticed that the average age of a basket maker was getting older and older, and mostly all of the elders knew the tradition, but it was less and less young people getting into it. And so for me, I started when I was 18, and so I think specifically back then, and even like when Jennifer started in the 90s, I don't think a lot of younger people maybe saw it as a way to make a living, and maybe they didn't realize that this type of art has a place in the modern day, and that you know, you can do, even as a young person, you can do something to showcase your perspective as an artist. And so, you know, it's, I guess for a while it had almost been seen as like a old lady kind of craft, you know. And so I feel like with some of us being younger, we're able to kind of infuse like a more modern style and kind of fresh kind of approach to everything. And so that's really important to me, to make it really exciting for like the younger generations of potential basket makers for the future. And so for this project specifically, I was really so excited to be asked to do this because honestly, to make contemporary pieces and pieces that are outside the norm, that's what I really look forward to doing. And if I could spend all my time just experimenting with other materials and playing and just kind of like getting into the zone in my workspace, that's what I would do. I would just experiment and play with different materials and just try this and that out. And so for me, this was like a really great opportunity, and I was really honored to be a part of this project, especially because I just, this is what I love to do. So when I was thinking about the concept of creating a piece that is made out of materials other than ash, I really thought about the different paths that I could take, and I thought about initially I could use other traditional materials, so like I could use other natural fibers and things like that, things that have been used for generations, as well as ash. And then I also thought about coming at it from a completely different and almost like unnatural kind of end product. So I kind of thought more of creating something that was almost like alien in almost opposite to our traditional work. And a lot of our work is grounded in nature, and it's from a lot of like natural materials and things like that. And so when I decided to make this piece, I wanted to go completely unnatural and almost like with a apocalyptic kind of perspective. Like, if we have nothing left for natural materials, what do we do? You know, and so that's kind of what I decided to incorporate into my work. And so this piece, what I ended up doing was, I think the most important thing about the ash in general is that you can't replace it, number one. It's so special. It's so unique. There's no other material like it. The things that you can do with it, you can twist it, you can bend it, you can, cut it as fine as a piece of thread, and it's still like incredibly strong. So I really didn't want to, I even though like this is part of the process, thinking of other materials to use, you just can't replace ash no matter what. But what I was thinking when I wanted to I wanted to mimic ash in a way, and I wanted to, I think the most important thing about the material is like the thickness. So a lot of us, when we're working, we we sometimes don't even have to look at what we're doing. We just go by feeling. We touch the wood, and certain aspects and certain pieces of the basket are different thicknesses. So, for example, the pieces that go up and down, those pieces are very thick, and it's almost like the skeleton of the basket. And then other pieces are very, very thin and fine, and especially to do, like Jennifer said, like the little ribbon curls and the points and things like that. You really have to have a fine piece of wood. So I thought about how can I have different thicknesses. And what I ended up doing was basically sandwiching pieces of fabric together and gluing them, almost like decoupage. So I built up layers of fabric, and depending on the thickness that I needed, it would be more and more layers if it was super thick, and then less layers for the thinner pieces. And then when I ended up trying to do the points with that material, because I had also painted most of the material, I used acrylic paint, I wasn't able to make those points. And so my whole idea had kind of, I had to rethink it. And so in order to make the points, I had to use a completely different material. And I just, being an artist, I'm also kind of a hoarder. And I have a lot of art supplies kicking around. If I see things that are, I could make something out of them, I just, squirrel it away. And so I happen to have a whole roll of this really cool wallpaper, and it was gray with actual wood grains in it. And I didn't buy it specifically for this project. I just had it, and I thought, oh, I wonder if that would work. And so I ended up making all the points with the wallpaper. And so pretty much it's made of fabric and wallpaper, acrylic paint, and some cordage. Yep. And then the antler, I wanted to also just kind of make it match the basket, and so that is made out of buffalo horn. So.
Danagak, Daliwas Geo, Nujiao Madakmiguk, Naga Beskaramuka Nil. My name is Geo, and I'm from Indian Township, which is where my family is from, and I'm from the Passamaquoddy tribe. I've known everybody at this table since I was very little. I started making baskets also in the 90s, but I was 4 years old. From about the time I could talk, I was asking my grandmother to teach me how to make baskets. And she would always say, no, you can't, you're not old enough. No, you can't, you're not old enough. And apparently from a very early age, the quickest way to get me to do something is to tell me that I can't do it. So I ended up in summer camp. I was finally excited to go, to be able to go to the summer camp on the reservation. because you had to be going into kindergarten. And so that fall I was starting kindergarten, and I was able to go to summer camp. So it was my first time on the school bus. It was very exciting. I was shocked to find out, shocked and relieved to find out that there were seats on the school bus. I didn't know that. I thought there was just those gray partition things to keep you from bumping into each other. And then my problem with there being no seatbelts will be a story for another time. So I made it to summer camp, and after months of my grandmother saying, no, you're not old enough, no, you're not old enough, I see a truck pull up, and I get excited because I thought it was my aunt. So I run up to said truck, and it was my aunt. It was just a different aunt than I thought it was, and it was actually my grandmother's aunt. So my great aunt who was there to teach a basket class. So I found out that the basket class was for junior high students. It was for like sixth grade through 8th grade. So I lied my way into the class by telling them that I already knew how to make a basket because my grandmother was Molly. So I guess that was a good enough lie because they let me into the class with my Aunt Duzalin's permission. So that day I got off the bus, and normally my grandmother, she said normally you would throw open the door and announce your arrival and walk in all excited to tell me about your day from camp. But that day, like, we heard the bus pull up, we heard it pull away, and the door opens, the door shuts. And I just walked in and I set my first basket down in front of my grandmother. And then I went outside to play with my cousins. And after that, I left her alone for a little bit after I proved that I could make a basket. And then by that fall, we made our first basket together. So I was 5 years old by the time my grandmother and I made our first basket together. And she describes it as one of the longest days of her life because it was such a small and simple basket, and I would not let her do it for me. My grandmother's style of helping you or teaching you is doing it for you. And hopefully you watched closely enough to catch it the next time around so that you can do it yourself. But even if she would weave a few rows for me thinking I wouldn't notice and would appreciate the help, I would rip it out as soon as she walked away because I'm like, you're not doing it for me, I'm doing it myself. So I've always been a rather stubborn and opinionated person. So after that, I kept making baskets. I started selling baskets when I was 7 years old. It was at a USET meeting in the United Southern and Eastern Tribes Corporation. It was at a USET meeting in Nashville, Tennessee. I sold my first basket for $20. After watching all my grandmother's baskets sell all weekend, mine weren't selling, so I made my grandmother move me to my own table so that I could sell my basket. But I couldn't just have one basket on my table, so I also made her give me a lot of her merchandise that wasn't baskets to like dress up my table a little bit. And one of my aunts wanted to buy my first basket. And she was like, oh, we were going through it. We were about to make the sale, $20. And she's like, oh, well, can I write you a check? And I'm like, oh, no, I don't accept checks. It's like, well, can I write your grandmother a check? No, this is my basket. So my grandmother's not selling it. So no, you can't write me a check. So she asked if she can write my grandma a check, and my gram will give me the $20. And I said, my grandmother isn't involved in this sale. So I'm arguing back and forth with my aunt, Franny Sockbeson, who still has that first basket. Meanwhile, she has to go and wait for me to be distracted to trade slip my grandmother a check. And then my grandmother secretly gives her a 20. And she comes back with a $20 bill. And I'm like, how can I help you? So I made my first sale when I was 7, and I've been doing it ever since. Like Sarah, I've always been an artist. I've always been drawn to art, and I didn't do baskets very often at home because I needed my grandmother's help. And that's when I learned beadwork. I didn't need my grandmother's help for beadwork. In fact, my grandmother couldn't help me with beadwork, and neither could my mom. So it was kind of nice to be able to do something all by myself and not need anybody's assistance. So even when my grandmother would go to shows, I might have 1 or 2 baskets and then like a rack of earrings that I was selling. And it wasn't until after college, after I went to Dartmouth College, that I realized that I already was an artist and that baskets were art. It took me that long to figure out that this thing that I'd been doing my whole life, something that I was really good at, was already an art form in and of itself. And people like Sarah, people like Jennifer going to the bigger art markets and really influencing the basket making trade so much that they've completely changed the game for future generations of basket makers. And kind of growing up as a basket maker and watching how that game has changed and kind of responded to that has really influenced me as an artist. So I take, with my approach to my baskets, I often like to take a traditional form, a traditional shape, or traditional design, and I always say I just make it a little gayer. I'm like, well, how can I add glitter to this basket without literally adding glitter? So I take those really traditional baskets and give a little bit of a Geo twist to them. And how can I make them a bit more fabulous and still have that traditional Wabanaki feel, but also unmistakably my work at the same time. So I bounce back and forth between lots and lots of color and no color at all. But for this project, both of these baskets were woven on my great-great-grandmother's basket mold. So it was my great-grandmother Kate's basket mold, and that's as far back as we can trace it. And she passed away when my grandmother was 7. So she passed it on to my great-grandmother Irene, who passed it on to my grandmother Molly, who has promised it to me one day. So this shape is a signature shape, and particularly the flat weaving on the bottom with the curls on the upper portion and the flowers in the middle was one of my my great-grandmother's and great-great-grandmother's really signature baskets. They were all known for this this particular style and design with, you know, different variations on color and what type of things might be woven in. So for my traditional basket, I wanted to stay with the natural colors of the ash because I knew I was going to go crazy with this one. And so I used a style taught to me by Fred Thoma, which is the quatrefoil pattern. And so that's an old maliseet design that I've started using and playing with and using a lot in my work that Fred Thoma taught to me. And he's always excited to see some of the new crazy color combinations that I come up with. So this is kind of an example of not only my family, but what I've done with those traditions and kind of taking those traditions and making them my own. For my non-traditional material basket, Donna said I couldn't use any ash, and because I'm me, I didn't listen. Half of the basket, if you look closely, it's actually made from Venetian blinds. I was so inspired. I was one of the actors in Donna's play about the Venetian basket, and as soon as we talked about the Venetian basket, I was like, I want to make a Venetian basket. So also like Sarah, I'm a hoarder, so I had these Venetian blinds at my house for like 2.5 years. I carried them all the way from Bar Harbor, Maine, back to Indian Township, and my boyfriend was like, why do you just have these broken blinds? I'm like, I need them, they're mine, leave them alone. So I just have piles of stuff that my boyfriend isn't allowed to throw away, and he doesn't know why. So I used half Venetian blinds, and the other half of the ash that I used was ash that was found in the stash of a deceased basket maker, Beatrice Sockthoma, who is my distant aunt and was one of our master basket makers from Zibaig. She passed away in the 90s, and her family had inherited all of her tools, and in the tools of blocks and gauges, my cousin David Bridges, who you might be familiar with his work, found a roll of ash, and he gave that to me. And so when I was asked to do this project for Donna, I didn't even tell Donna about it. I wanted to make sure that I used Beatrice's ash. And Beatrice was the mother of my aunt who bought my first basket when I was 7. So you see how it's all connecting here. So that's what the ribs are made out of. Some of the weavers and the flowers are all made from Beatrice's ash because I wanted people to see you shouldn't just throw away your materials, even if it's old, even if it's brown. Like, I split that myself. It wasn't split. I had to split and scrape it and get my ribbons from it. So it's really a testament to how well that material holds up over time, because it sat in a box for 20 years before I got it. My other materials, I use some of my own scraps. I have so many bags of scraps in my quote-unquote craft room. Anything that gets squirreled away just gets thrown into that room. It's pretty bad right now. But I use some of my own colored scraps, so I didn't prepare any new ash for the basket. So it's part ash, part Venetian blinds. And then I wove some yarn into it instead of braided sweetgrass, and I got... I'm kind of sad still that it isn't a hat, but it did make a very soft basket. It's half silk and half bamboo fibers. And then the ribbon curls, yeah, it's very soft. And then the ribbon curls are actual ribbon. I got ribbon at a craft store, and I got it because it had glitter on it. So there was lots of glitter. And I took, I believe it was Gorilla Glue epoxy. It came in a little thing. You squeeze it out, you mix it. And I just painted each of the strips of ribbon before I wove them in, and that made them stiff enough to be like standers. And so now that's how I created that basket.
So I'm going to say sorry but not sorry that we've pushed time, but I wasn't going to... Each of these artists is so amazing. I could listen to them for much longer. So maybe that was my role to have them go shorter, but that doesn't seem possible or even remotely fair. So I want to... We can have some questions maybe for at least 10. It's 1:20, I think, something like that. We'll hand it over to Don.
First of all, I forgot to recognize Barbara McGowan over there, who is a big part of this project. As far as we did a video, and you guys will get to see it at some point. I'm not sure when, but you will. Yeah, I mean, every single one of the artists have been interviewed on the video, and they talk about their baskets. The other thing I wanted to say was all of these baskets in the collection, Seven Eagles is lending them to UNE for the next 3 years. So, just thought I'd say that. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. So now you can do your questions.
Thanks for great presentations. In this area, we're familiar with the white ash and the green ash that grows in our yards and all around. We're not as familiar with the brown ash. Can you just say a few words about how do you harvest it? What size? Do you take branches? Just give us a little bit of a sense of harvesting and utilizing the brown ash. Thank you.
So in terms of differentiating the different types of ash tree, for example, the brown ash usually grows in swamps, so very swampy, wet areas. It likes to have its feet wet. And so usually the white and green ash, they usually don't, a lot of them you'll see lining the streets and whatnot. Like you said, you're probably more familiar with those types. A brown ash, actually, it's harder to identify because it can take on a lot of different looks with the way that the fissures in the bark look. If it's covered in moss and things like that, especially because it's a swamp tree, it can look different depending on its location and things like that. But as an experiment, we actually chopped down a white ash tree just to see if we could potentially use the wood to make baskets with. And when we cut it down, the growth rings looked really thick and nice. The tree looked great, and it looked, hey, this could be potentially a good tree. But then we pounded the log, and with the pounding process, you're basically you're pounding there's summer growth and there's winter growth, and so you're basically pulverizing the winter growth. And so when those growth rings eventually separate, they peel apart from each other, and they'll peel off the tree just like peeling a banana. So once these splints are taken off the tree, they looked great. They looked like we could use this potentially for baskets. But then we went and started splitting the wood. It split. It was able to be split. However, when I went to weave with it, I couldn't do the fine points like this. If I tried to do some of the finer workings, it was very brittle and would just break. So I couldn't do a lot of the more fine work. And so I think what I've found in that experiment specifically was that the brown ash is a lot more flexible. It almost has like a special elasticity in comparison to the white ash. The white ash just was a lot more brittle.
Sometimes they use the white ash for the hoops and the handles on the utility baskets, like the potato baskets and the pack baskets, but it is too brittle to be able to do any kind of fancy work with.
Hi. As several of the panelists know, I'm kind of become a Wabanaki basket groupie, so I'm I'm really delighted. Yes, I have a number of Geo strawberries tucked away, for instance. So thank you all very much for being here. But I'm not going to ask an artistic question. I'm going to ask more about the emerald ash borer because I've been reading about that as well. And I wondered if you could explain a little bit more some of the plans to slow down the spread or protect. I mean, you seem like you're not hopeless about it. And so I'd love to hear some positive plans about dealing with this menace.
Yeah, I'll take the. Did you have also something to say, Geo? So yeah, we've been working. There are a number of agreements, first of all, in place between the USDA and the tribes here in the state, and that has a lot to do with communications and planning around how to design and implement some of the quarantines. So we'll be, the Basketmakers and the tribal governments will be very early on informed in sort of how that planning is going. So there's already been meetings and back and forth about a bunch of that. The plans are also about how to deal with scarcity. So the idea that this will create scarcity for basket makers involves us working collectively, but with different entities and different groups across the state, where we've already sort of worked out some of the elements of kind of building up a cooperative or a possibility for a cooperative of the materials. But even before that, we would see us. We've done research to basically locate basket quality brown ash trees in places in the state that people might not yet know about. So we've been working with forestry folks who, do the sort of research design, but also using Wabanaki ecological knowledge to sort of frame up that forestry research. So we would actually be able to locate basket quality ash in places that traditionally we haven't harvested from, but given certain characteristics, given certain needs in terms of what a basket quality sort of brown ash looks like, building up that material. So there's a lot, and maybe Geo has some more to say.
Nobody in the world is more prepared for the arrival of the emerald ash borer than Wabanaki people. We have been talking about it since 2004, and when I first joined the conversation, I was told that I probably shouldn't even think about going into basket making because by the time I was old enough to do it, there would be no ash trees. I distinctly remember one of the first meetings we went to where we were told as basket makers that by 2013, there would be no ash trees left in Maine. So it's 2018, and we've just detected it. Mind you, we've detected it on two sides. We're going to find it on the other side now. But we've been preparing for it. We've been storing seeds. People have been planting seedlings. We've been studying the bug, looking at what it is attracted to, and it does tend to avoid the smaller trees. It doesn't attack the saplings, so we know about setting trap trees. We know about not moving firewood. So we are planting trees. We've saved seeds to plant afterwards. We're as prepared for this as we possibly can be. And just playing with alternative materials and the videos that were made, we're bracing ourselves, and our basket making traditions will survive for the next 7 generations.
Terrific, thank you.
Could I ask, I probably don't need that. Nobody's ever accused me of not talking loud enough. Oh, am I? All right, sorry about that. What was I going to say? Oh, I appreciate all of the efforts that are underway in Maine and elsewhere to try to contain, and I understand the importance of reducing the movement of the pests. I'm wondering in the entomology world if they've tried, or if there's an effort anywhere in the United States to interrupt the reproductive cycle of this pest as they have successfully with other pests. Is that something that is heard of or talked about or whatever?
Yeah. So a couple of things. You know, where the emerald ash borer comes from in Asia, it is like another borer. You know, like there are plenty of borers out there, but they tend to attack, you know, sick or dying trees, and they feed on them. And so there are borers already native to Maine that actually can attack ash trees, but they only do it, you know, not the healthy ones, because there's a series of things that are resistant that make the trees resistant. Since 2007, actually, the USDA has actually had a series of attempts around interventions, mostly through biocontrols. So there is also chemical things that can be done that would protect a tree. Those tend to not be in a large scale. So that's kind of like an injection into the tree that would protect that one tree, right, from ever being attacked and killed by an emerald ash borer. It actually makes it almost impossible for the reproduction to happen in that tree. The biocontrols, and really what you would want in any invasive is, you know, what makes an invasive so difficult ecologically is that nothing knows that it's food for something else, right? It hasn't reached any kind of equilibrium. It's just a free-for-all of kind of eating and killing of whatever it goes after. So these biocontrols attack different parts of the reproductive cycle, but they tend to be other little bugs, right, that will eat the larvae or eat the eggs or eat, you know, that kind of attack at different moments in time. None of those have really taken hold. And part of it is, if you want to think about it, that's part of it is they're fairly conservative in what they will set out as. So the idea is, like, you have an invasive. What are we going to do to combat it? Introduce another invasive. So they're actually pretty, thankfully, I think, conservative when it comes to how we do these biocontrols. More often than not, what happens is that there's just a sort of collapse of the population of the biocontrol because it doesn't quite know how to behave or doesn't find its way to interrupting what it's designed to kind of interrupt. There are wasps that can help for monitoring, but they never get up to population where they would actually be enough wasps to kill a bunch of emerald ash borer or the larvae or the eggs. So there is enough. They are redoubling efforts on biocontrols because they impact it a little bit. You know, it's sort of like in that 30% range, which is a little bit slowing. So there'll continue to be these biocontrols. I actually think at some point they will probably be introduced into Maine because they do have that slowing effect. But that depends on a whole series of things, which has to do with really slowing how quickly it spreads. And so there's a lot of forestry techniques, and Geo referred to them, like trap tree. You know, there's a whole thing that you can kind of draw by killing strategically the ash trees, because the pheromones of a dying ash tree are actually what sort of triggers the emerald ash borer to kind of go hunt. So that idea that you would strategically kill certain ash trees to draw it in a certain direction for an infestation is one of the really important techniques of forest management. We also benefit from the fact that ash trees only make up 4% of the forest in Maine, and of course brown ash is a much smaller percentage of that. But in the upper Midwest, where it spread very, very quickly, and sort of almost like, within a year was like in Indiana, it took a year and a half for it to basically go from one little small part of it to like almost the whole state. But ash trees make up about 40% of their forest. So that idea, the 4% versus 40%, mean that there's less, the population cascading in exponential growth won't ever happen in Maine, just because there aren't enough ash trees for it to kind of reach at a certain population level. So between that and forestry techniques and our preparedness, that's, the hopefulness comes from a lot of those things.
I'm sorry to say, I think we have to end here, but thank you all so much for sharing.